Welcome to Spotlight Sessions, where we shine a
What's
light
your
on
story?
incredible impact. What does accessibility mean to you?
What's your mission? Welcome all to accessiBe's Spotlight Sessions, where we shine a light on incredible individuals and organizations and the work that they do. I'm your host, Josh Basil. I'm a C4-5 quadriplegic, paralyzed below my shoulders, and a power wheelchair user. I'm the Community Relations Manager at accessiBe and a passionate disability rights advocate and trial attorney focused on breaking down barriers to access and inclusion for people with disabilities. Today on accessiBe's Spotlight Sessions, we're joined by Alex Winstanley, the Managing Director at Smiles Training. Welcome, Alex.
Hi, Josh. How are you?
Good. I'm excited to have you on today's program, so let's jump right into it. Tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Yeah, so I'm a former teacher, Josh. I was also a part-time carer or personal assistant to disabled people locally where I live. And that really drove my passion for everything related to disability inclusion. And that drove a lot of my passions around inclusion in teaching. I left my teaching job in 2019 to set up Happy Smiles Training. We're a disabled persons-led organisation, and I set that up alongside my friend Hayden, who has cerebral palsy, and we set Happy Smiles up inspired by Hayden and his story, which I won't go into, it'll take too long. But we really wanted to change the narrative around disability, and we wanted that to be led by disabled people. So that's why we set up, and we've grown significantly since then.
All right, so tell us more about that. So dive a little bit deeper into Happy Smiles Training and kind of what you've been up to lately.
Sure, yeah. So we set up in September 2019, and then 6 months later, as we all know, COVID hit, so not the best timing to leave your job. But I was very fortunate that we could manage through that time. So we did lots of projects and different things. And then coming out of COVID, we've gradually started to grow our team. So we've delivered training. We deliver training led by disabled people to schools and community groups and businesses. All around a range of different topics like inclusive language and terminology and resilience and hate crime and loads of different topics. But we've grown a lot. We've delivered training to just over 12,000 people now, and we're recognised on the Shaw Trust's Disability Power 100 list last year, so 100 of the most influential disabled organisations or people in the country, and we're on that list. So we feel really privileged and proud to be on that list now, and very pleased with everything that we're doing.
So with the trainings, who's the target demographic? Or are you guys expanding that now that 12,000 people is a lot of people? It's awesome.
Yeah, thanks, Josh. We started with a target audience of schools, children, young people, because obviously my background, like I say, was teaching, and I knew that we needed to plant the seed. In fact, a little story. There's a little girl who one day I was with Hayden. We were in Florida, actually. And the little girl said to her dad, "Daddy, why's that man in a wheelchair?" And the dad just walked away. He didn't know how to answer that question. And that's not his fault. He wasn't being a horrible person. I'm sure he was a nice person. But he didn't know how to answer that. So we said we need to answer that question. And it has to come from people with lived experience. So that's what was actually key to us. And we started working with children and young people. And then that just grew and grew. So we've worked with children as young as 3, 4. We've worked with care home residents and absolutely everyone in between.
That's so awesome. But it's so important to get to the youth early on. Like I found I didn't know much about disability before I had a spinal cord injury.
Yeah.
All I knew much about disability was that Superman became paralyzed. Yeah. That's all I knew in the 90s. Yeah. And then, I ended up having my spinal cord injury. A wave picked me up, dropped me on my head in the ocean, and just broke my neck. And that was a start to a new life for me. But I'm now a dad, and just being able, kids are so genuinely honest and curious. And if you feed them the information of and the right conversations to really talk about this, they start to get it a lot more. And it becomes a more natural conversation as they grow up, rather than something that they're just either curious about or misled about, or just creating their own assumptions that, grow and grow and grow into something that's not what's best for them to like really know about the disability community.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Josh. Yeah, you're spot on. The more we ignore that conversation, the more that the stigma grows, and the more that the lack of understanding. People sometimes say ignorance, but I would say, like, with children, it's just a lack of understanding and the curiosity. We've got to feed that curiosity, and we've got to feed it in a really positive way. And that's not just making everything like really nice and sunshine and rainbows. We've got to be realistic. In fact, that was the inspiration behind when COVID hit. We weren't able to get into schools or anything, obviously, for a while. So I started to write children's books, and that came from nowhere. It was a book about my grandma who had dementia. So, and because people don't talk about dementia, we don't talk about difference or disability. So I wanted children to start talking about it, to understand it, and that won this award with the Alzheimer's Society in the UK, and really took off more than I ever expected, and led to a full series of books. So I've written books on depression, cancer, Tourette's, and cerebral palsy, all inspired by real people. And we do a lot of readings of those in schools and with children and young people. And I'm working on books at different times. And people are always like, can you write one on this? Can you write one on that? And I'd love to just be writing books forever. But that's something that is another example of starting that conversation as early as possible, so that we can, really create that change for the next generation.
That's wonderful. Oh, that's so cool. And when it comes to kids, so like you're doing all these trainings and talks, is there any play-based kind of activities you do with the kids to get them to kind of like maybe even understand what a disability is physically or mentally or cognitively? I'm so curious what exists there.
Yeah, no, it's such a good question, Josh. It's something that we've definitely got some plans for some different things in the future. We want to introduce some different things around technology and stuff. But for now, we do different activities, like we do an inclusive sports session, for example. We do different sports activities that enable people to experience like what it might be like to have experience sensory deprivation. Do you know what I mean? Having some sort of like a blindfold, for example. Not that completely emulates having a visual impairment, but doing sports using wheelchairs. As you can imagine, when we introduce wheelchairs and so, kids love it. They think it's amazing. Hayden, who I set Happy Smiles up with, my daughter Lola, she loves him. She's 2, and she talks about his chair and stuff. Now she's really intrigued by his chair. So kids are obviously really intrigued by the chair, and they want to try it and sit on it and control it and stuff like that. And I suppose it's just trying to give them that taste and harness that enthusiasm, and make them realise at the same time, this isn't just fun and games. This is someone's life, and this is an aid that gives someone the opportunity to have independence. But sure, like, if we were saying, don't go near that chair or whatever, I feel like, again, that just builds that stigma.
You don't want to scare them about the disability. You want to teach them about the disability and have an understanding about it. And I would love to know, do you have any memorable stories of kind of your time with some of the trainings or talking with kiddos that's kind of had a lasting impact on you?
Yeah, a few. A couple of ones. Well, one is a little bit of a funny story, but we were working with some really young children once, a couple of years ago, and they were doing some designs for a more inclusive world. We'd done some work with them over 3 weeks, and one of the children was presenting their work, and it was a dog. They designed a robo-dog. It was this robo-dog that was going to like guide someone who might have a visual impairment, and it was going to be able to help them to move around if they had a physical impairment, and all these cool things. And it would be like a sat nav to help them to get home in it, and all these built-in technology. And at the end, the kid said, and if they ever got into trouble, there'd be a gun as well, just in case. And I was just like, like, okay, that's just children for you, isn't it? Like, just come out with this random stuff. But yeah, that's something that we always sort of laugh about. We're like, we didn't quite get that message across. We're not talking about guns, but no, there's a few. One story, just to tell you quickly, we did a reading of one of my books, which is called My Child Has Cerebral Palsy, and that was inspired by Hayden and Hayden's family, and lots of families of people I know who have cerebral palsy. And our team were reading that in the school, and there was two twins. There was a girl and a boy, and the little boy, Alfie, he had cerebral palsy. He was going to secondary school, and his twin sister was really worried. She didn't understand that he needed more support than she did and more care than she did. And she was starting to get to that age, 9, 10, 11. She was thinking, what's the future going to look like? So she was really upset. By the end of the session, she'd spoken to all of our team, everyone there in that day had cerebral palsy, and it completely changed her outlook on how life was going to be for Alfie. She realised that actually Alfie would have a future, with organisations like ours that give people that opportunity. So she was very excited about that, and that went from a really emotional. The whole thing was emotional, but she was she had very negative perception at the start, and at the end, it was her outlook for Alfie was far more positive.
Love that. I love that. And what's the first thing comes to mind when you hear the word accessibility?
Opportunity, in my mind. Yeah, I think giving people that opportunity to have independence, to experience what everyone would experience. So that's what that brings to mind for me.
It's a good answer. And what's one thing you wish people knew more about people with disabilities?
I think it's just that there's not a right answer. So people worry that they need to get everything right. They need to say the right words. They need to say them in the right way. There's certainly wrong ways to do it. Don't get me wrong. There's really bad ways of speaking to or with disabled people, or how we associate with disability or thing. But I think people try and get this thing perfect, and I don't think you're ever going to get it perfect, because the one thing people need to remember is that everything is about being person-centered. So you've got to be specific to the individual. I'm not just talking about Hayden who has cerebral palsy. I'm talking about Hayden who, he has cerebral palsy, but he's also in his mid-20s, loves going out with his friends, all these other aspects to his personality. So it's about being person-centered, and the way we communicate and talk to people and be with people is in a person-centered way. Like you just said, Josh, about your spinal injury, but I'm not just talking to Josh who's had a spinal injury. I'm talking about Josh who's got a family. Like I've got a young family. I can associate with you on that, and that's what I'd want to talk about as well, if that makes sense.
We have a lot of similarities in this world. Everybody, thinks it's a divided world, but I wish we could all come together on our common similarities and have conversations, and whatever differences we might have, learn from them.
Yeah.
And that's a beautiful thing.
100%.
In order to make the world a more inclusive place, what's one thing you think everyone could do a little bit more of?
I think speak to people. We said before about asking questions. Kids ask the best questions. We get asked so many questions, from what's your favorite Xbox game to just questions about how do you go to bed and get around in a car. All these questions. But that, like I said with that story earlier, with that little girl, when she asked her dad that question, she was just being curious. And as adults, as we get older, we just gets drilled out of us that we can't ask questions. We can't speak to people about that. And I think if one thing that we could do is speak to people with lived experience, we will all learn. In my opinion, the only way that we'll see real change is when people at the very top, who are the decision makers, have lived experience. At the minute, we've still got people making decisions who don't have that lived experience of others. And, it's like trying to tell me, I live in a place called Wigan, a little town near Manchester. It's like someone outside of Wigan trying to tell me, it's like you, Josh, it's like you trying to tell me how to live in Wigan. You wouldn't know what Wigan's like, I assume. So, it's the exact same thing.
But if I asked you, what's the best place to live in Wigan, I'd start learning.
Yeah, exactly.
What do you think are some of the biggest current gaps within businesses prioritizing access and inclusion?
Yeah, it's a really great question, and one that I'm trying to conquer, I suppose, all the time. Trying to create that link between businesses, corporate organisations, and accessibility is a challenge. I think it's trying to make them realise the value of accessibility for their customers and for their employees. We've got people in our team for one reason or another, for how they look, how they present, how they communicate or move or whatever, a business might think I could never employ them. But actually, when you again look at the person-centered approach and think, what are this person's skills and abilities? What are they really good at? How can we harness that? Then businesses wouldn't be losing out on. Well, in the UK, they're losing out on like £274 billion a year. By not accessing the purple pound. So, we need to really promote the power of that spending power of disabled people.
Alex, thank you so much for being our guest today on accessiBe's Spotlight Sessions. I love our conversations, and let's keep having these type of conversations within your trainings around the world, within everywhere. You're doing incredible work, Alex.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And to all of our guests, thank you so much for staying to the end of accessiBe's Spotlight Sessions. Make sure to hit that subscribe button. Make sure to follow us at accessiBe_community. And until next time, thank you so much for being on this journey with us. Take care, everyone.